They're nothing much to look at now. The leather scuffed a dusty brown, and the stitching along the right toe gave up the ghost sometime around 1957. But I mended it with fishing line and stubbornness. On a rainy day, they smell like leaf mold and soap. On a dry day, they smell like old dust in my mother's hands. I keep them under the bed in a shoebox that once held something expensive from a department store with a chandelier and a doorman. I never owned anything from a place like that. But a neighbor gave me the box decades ago, and I decided the box could be fancy even if my life was plain. You asked for my story, baby. You said you wanted the whole thing, not the cleaned-up version. I'll give you what I can. Know that all my life I've walked farther than people expected and on soles that should be given way. Every blister taught me something. Every stitch kept me upright. If I tell it right, you'll smell the rain. I was born in a mill town that looked sweet from a distance. People like to paint white porches and churches in sunlit oils. But if you look close, you'll see the paint flaking and the church steps cracking under knees that never had time to rest. We were a gumbo of the Midwest and South train tracks out back, wheat fields out front, and a river that rose like mood and memory every spring. Mama used to knot my hair with a ribbon. She dyed with blueberries when she couldn't afford the good kind. That ribbon was the brightest thing about me, besides my laugh, before life taught my mouth to stay shut. My first hand-me-down shoes were from my cousin Hazel. Hazel had feet shaped like a question mark. Every question she'd ever asked turned into an ache and bent her toes inward. The shoes were brown Oxfords with laces like wrung-out snakes. They pinched me in the mornings and cut me in the evenings, and I wore wool in August because the tongue rubbed my skin raw. I didn't mind. There were shoes that could go anywhere, and going anywhere sounded like magic. Daddy died in the 4th grade. He didn't die in a war or a newspaper-worthy event. He died under a truck he was trying to fix for a neighbor who paid him in pie and promises. I still have nightmares about the neighbor standing with his hat in his hands and the pie cooling on the counter as if dessert could explain death. Mama folded her grief into small, firm squares and tucked it into her apron pocket, where it rattled like coins she'd never spend. People came by with casseroles that tasted of salt and obligation. I learned to say thank you for things I couldn't swallow. I grew into those brown Oxfords before 5th grade ended. Mama patched my dresses with flowered fabric from a dying sofa and took in sewing from women who talked about each other while their hems were in her hands. I learned to keep secrets with pins between my lips. We lived near the tracks. The rhythm of those trains taught me about leaving long before I ever did. There was a boy who whistled like a meadowlark, Levi Parker. He could throw a baseball just so and turn to look at you with that sideways gentleness some boys keep until the world steals it. We sat on the back steps and he told me he wanted to build houses one day, small ones that sat square and safe on their lots where kids could hide under beds and not from each other. He asked me what I wanted, told him I wanted to be many things, a teacher, a dancer, the wind. He laughed like a stream running over shallow rocks. I took a Saturday job at Bink's Diner on the highway when I was 15, and that's where I learned the smell of burnt grease and trucker talk and how a woman can stand straight even when a man's gaze tries to fold her. Mr. Bink paid me $2 a day and all the pie I could eat, but I had long ago learned that pie can't fill certain hollows. Mama worked nights mending and mornings at the laundry. Sometimes I'd find her standing at the sink staring at her hands as if they were maps to a place she'd never get to find. There was a flood this spring. I turned 16. The river swelled like it had been insulted too many times, and it decided to speak in water. The town gathered sandbags like prayers, and we lined them along the bank while bees drowned in humming clumps on fence posts. The water came anyway. It went first for the yards with least to lose, then for the rest. In the muddy, cold dawn, I waded chest deep, holding our shoebox above my head. Mama kept screaming for the photos and the baby blanket and the sugar bowl with the fiddlehead fern painted on it. I couldn't take them all, so I took the shoes. Mama didn't speak to me for a week. Later, when the house was a husk and everything smelled like the inside of a rusted bucket, she sat on the floor and said, "You chose the right thing. I didn't know then why she was crying, but I do now. Levi came by with a hammer and nails and a promise. We patched and hammered and patched some more. The town split into those who left and those who stayed out of spite. We stayed because Mama said it took courage to stand in a place that had tried to drown you. I wasn't sure. Courage seemed like something other people applauded when they didn't have to do it themselves. My shoes grew slick on the soles. I learned to walk with my toes curled a little like a cat that knew better than to trust a roofline. Everybody's got to tell you can only see when they think they're alone. Mine was that little curl, that pre-flinch. When I graduated from high school, a miracle letter came with a seal on its scholarship, that fancy word that tasted like chocolate. A teacher had put my name forward, and I'd written an essay about trains and hand-me-downs and women with pin-pricked lips who hold this country together when men are busy being loud. We are pleased to offer, it said. I pressed it flat on the table and smoothed it with both palms like it could be ironed into forever. Mama stared at me with love and terror. "We can't afford the rest," she said. "Your brother." She didn't have to finish. A little brother Julian had ears like folded shells and a chest that wheezed when he laughed. I wrote a letter to the scholarship committee with words that felt like funeral clothes. I told them I would be back. I didn't know from where. Only that I would gather whatever it was that a woman needs in this world to claim a seat that ISNT offered. I spent that fall carrying home heating oil in sacks and sniffing my wrists for the ghosts of a different life. Levi kissed me behind the Rexall and told me he'd wait. He joined the Carpenters Union and began to build small houses that sat square and safe on their lots. I stood in the doorway of one and felt envy like a splinter under the nail. There was a man who came through the diner with a smile that wasn't attached to anything. You know the kind. He ordered coffee and said my name, like it tasted of honey. His name was Drew. He told me he worked for a big company in the city. He had a car with chrome you could see the future in, and he opened the door for me like he understood the weight of things. Asked me what I wanted, and I didn't tell him when. I told him a small house. He laughed and said, "That's easy." I married him 6 months later. Easy is a word that should be plucked like a weed whenever it shows up. It grows fast and kills the tomatoes you've worked so hard to coax into sweetness. Drew liked to have a wife who smiled and never ran out of milk or patience, but he didn't like to come home. He loved a room when he entered it, but not a woman when he owed her tenderness. He said business like it was rosary. He said I was lucky. Our first baby came in a winter that split fences with ice. My feet swelled. And for a while my shoes didn't fit those hand-me-downs waiting in the box while my body tried to make space in a world that had not been generous. Our son Daniel came stubborn and perfect and colicky. His cry was a saw that ran my nerves into ribbons. I learned a kind of exhaustion that made me see darts of light at the edges of my eyes. Mama moved in for 6 weeks and laid him across her lap and hummed vowels like spells while I slept in 5-minute pieces. Drew left the job in the city. Drew left his promises in a box on a high shelf where we couldn't reach them. He told me he'd start a company. He told me he'd double a savings that didn't exist. He told me I was impatient. He asked me for love and the title to my car. When I couldn't give both, he took them anyway. Behind our house was a fence, and over that fence was a woman named Miss Liddy, whose hair was white as new bread and whose mouth was as sharp as a needle. Liddy had moved up from the Delta before I was born, and she kept her sugar in a coffee can labeled flour so people wouldn't steal it. People, she always said, are good most of them, but people are still people. She taught me to stretch butter with a spoonful of lard and to keep a roll of dollar bills in my shoe. "You keep money in your shoe," she told me, tapping the arch of my foot, "because you might lose your head, you might lose your heart, but you still have to walk." When Drew started coming home drunk and then not at all, I thought about the scholarship letter. I thought about wind. A woman can't feed a baby with wind. I took the morning shift at the diner and the evening shift mending for the women who gossiped. I wore out 3 pairs of cheap flats that turned my toes to question marks. I started putting bills in the old brown Oxfords in the shoebox, tucked under their curled tongues like secrets. Every time I slid that box back under the bed, I heard Miss Liddy's voice, for when you have to stand. The night the landlord banged on the door with his beef-red fist and the word late came at me like a thrown brick. I had a fever and Daniel had a croup cough that made him sound like a broken accordion. The landlord's name was Pike, long before I learned to think of him as the man who taught me the shape of revenge. "You've got till Friday," he said. "There are good folks need this place." He looked me up and down like I was the problem with the country. I took Daniel to the county clinic where a nurse with eyes the color of river mud put a mask on his face and told me to breathe with him. I thought about the landlord and the rent and how I could pawn my wedding ring and still not make it. When the nurse slipped her hand into mine, I almost fell down. "You're doing it," she said. "You're already doing it." I met a woman in the waiting room with a boy perched on her lap like a wary bird. She was quiet as a fresh grave, and when she looked up, I saw a bruise flowering. This is a story about courage, I promised you, and tragedies and lessons. It is also a story about women in waiting rooms. Keep that in your pocket. I took off my wedding ring and sold it to a jeweler who smiled too much and gave too little. I gave the landlord the money and told him I'd have the rest by Monday. He said words that made the air in the room sharp. I put the baby to sleep in a dresser drawer lined with towels, because the crib had gone out on the porch for an absent father who owed it to us and never brought it back. I put my money in my shoes and my hope in the corner where it wouldn't be in anyone's way. I was 23 when I decided revenge could be something other than a slap. Revenge could be survival in the shape of a ledger. I started keeping records every late repair, every uncashed check, every time Pike came in drunk, every time he called me sweetheart like it was an insult. I kept the names of the other tenants in a notebook that looked like a cookbook. "What you baking, Ruth?" somebody would ask. And I'd say, "Something that'll rise." Levi came by on a Saturday. He wore a ring I hadn't given him, a shy little gold band-like apology. He said he still built houses and that he still wanted to build a life with me. I saw his kind eyes and his careful hands and the future folding around him like clean laundry. I shook my head. The truth is, sometimes love is not a door. It's a window you lean out of to feel the air and then go back to whatever you were doing because the stove is on and the baby is crying. He hugged me the way a person hugs a friend he once wanted to marry, and he left me with a bag of nails and a praise I didn't think I deserved. I baked pies with borrowed apples and took them to neighbors I barely knew. And I asked them 100 questions about their problems, their pipes, their rent. You can collect a town if you're willing to sit and drink bitter coffee and listen to the same story 3 times until the truth steps out from behind the couch. I learned Pike had a second set of books. I learned he took deposits and kept them when people left. I learned he made passes at a tenant whose mother had a heart condition and whose husband worked nights. I learned that good people, most of them, were still people. It came and it went, their courage like tide. I took my notebook to the courthouse and a lawyer took one look at the numbers and said, I paid him with bills for my shoe and an IOU written on faith. A month later, the judge ruled that Pike owed us repairs and 3 families their deposits back and 2 violations he pretended he hadn't understood. It wasn't much, it was a crack. We made it a door. The day Pike paid me, he dropped the bills like he was setting down dirty laundry. I said, "Thank you," like my mother taught me. When he walked away, I turned to the women in the hall and felt something I can only call the opposite of drowning. I went home and bought myself a pair of proper shoes and an orange for Daniel and a single marigold. I planted in a chipped mug outside the kitchen door. Revenge, I learned, isn't loud. Not if you were raised to keep your pins between your lips. Revenge is a life that keeps standing. Revenge is not letting them turn your tenderness into evidence against you. After that, it was less like a story and more like a road with potholes and flowers anyway. I took in 2 foster kids whose mother went to rehab and came out sober like glass. I learned the difference between breaking and bending and how to do more of the latter. I opened a shop with the money from my shoe, a tiny storefront between a barber and a pawn. And I called it Second Steps. I sold old shoes and fixed soles and sewed purses out of leather jackets a woman's boyfriend had finally left behind. Women came just to be somewhere a man's voice. Didn't he fill the air like smoke? Men came because their boots had holes and their pride had bigger ones. I kept a box of lollipops by the register and a jar of safety pins for hopeless moments. Daniel grew with a stubbornness that matched mine. He wanted to leave town the way you want to scratch a place that's healed but still itches. He thought my secondhand shop was a life sentence I'd pronounced on myself. He told me I was small town, small-minded, small. I told him I had big faith he'd grow kind. He rolled his eyes so hard I swear he saw his own brain. He took his diploma with a grimace and went west to sell things to people who didn't need them, which, I suppose, is just like selling pie. In those years, I stood in a lot of kitchens and living rooms where women apologized for the stains on their sofas and men apologized for nothing. I stood on courthouse steps and sang "We Shall Not Be Moved" with a throat that knew exactly what those words cost. I learned that the wind will not take your part unless you stand where it has no choice but to go through you. One day, a girl came into the shop with hair like a crow's wing and a mouth set against mercy. She needed new laces. She needed bus fare. She needed to not need anything from anyone. I recognized myself the second she stood there. "What's your name?" I asked. She shrugged. "The one my mother gave me doesn't fit," she said. "I'm called Ro." I told her my name was Ruth, and it fit fine, but most days I forgot I had it. Kay told her I had a job that paid mostly in breathing room, and that if she swept and sorted and minded the register, I'd pay her in cash and maybe trust if she wanted it. She stayed. She stole $20 and an old pair of boots 3 weeks later. She didn't come back for 6 months. The day she returned, she put $40 on the counter and the boots at my feet and said, "You make this kind of place in the world. You should expect someone like me." I told her I did, and also I hoped for someone like her. We walked through winters with our scarves like flags in summers that pressed us down like hot thumbs. We walked through quiet revolutions, roads paved, schools integrated, laws passed, neighbors moved. I buried Mama in a silk dress someone had given to me in a bag of donations, and I tucked a pincushion into her hands because she had always made beauty at the sharp end of things. I wore my brown Oxfords under my black dress and felt the earth receive her like a heartbeat. Years later, I saw Drew on a bench outside the bus station. He had the look of a man who wanted to be the first person to tell you the joke he heard, even though you both heard it already. He was thinner, and he had a cane he tapped against the ground like he owned the rhythm of it. He told me he'd been sober 3 years. He told me he wanted to apologize. I stood there with the sun on the right side of my face and the breeze smelling like creosote from the railroad ties, and I realized revenge sometimes means saying nothing. I let the silence stand. "Thank you for Daniel," I said, because it was the truest thing. He nodded. He died 2 winters later in a town nobody writes songs about. I sent flowers to the church because Mama had taught me to be the kind of person who sends flowers even when every part of you wants to send something else. Daniel married a woman who believed in vitamins and minimalist furniture and the power of the right kind of light. They built a house so white it looked like they were living in a wedding cake. They had a daughter with your eyes. They didn't teach her how to sit on the floor with old women and listen. Not at first, but you found me anyway, didn't you? You came to the shop when you were 12 and asked if you could try on boots meant for men twice your size. You walked around in them like you were learning a foreign accent, and I clapped because courage always sounds a little like pretending when you begin. By then, the landlord Pike had gone on to the great ledger in the sky. His son, who had his father's chin and his mama's sad eyes, tried to sell our block to a developer from out of town who came wearing sneakers that cost more than my first car. The developer wanted to build apartments with names like the Gables and the Oaks, even though there weren't any Gables or Oaks anywhere near their only alleys that smelled of old beer and rain, and a barber who told the best lies you ever heard. The lawyer said eminent domain, and the city council said progress, and I said no so hard my throat hurt for days. Here's what I knew then that I had deigned to known at 23. A town is just people. And people can be convinced to do the right thing if you bring them pie and numbers. I baked again. Not because I believed in pie, but because it gave me a reason to stand in kitchens where truth was shy. I made a binder with tabs like a teacher who never got her classroom. I brought pictures of children playing hopscotch on cracked sidewalks and lists of people whose names sounded like music when you said them in a row. I invited the developer to the shop. I handed him a pair of boots with soles like firm kindness. He said I don't wear secondhand. I said, I know. He hired a lawyer with a pocket square that matched his offense. They sent letters full of shall and hereby and me. I sent letters back that said we and our children. We went to meetings in rooms that smelled of old coffee and new ambition. People came because we were giving out cookies, or because their mama told them to, or because they remembered losing something they never expected to miss. We made our case. The council voted to designate our block a historic district. Somebody cried. It might have been me. The developer went 3 blocks over and built the oaks where the sycamores used to be. I told myself we de-saved something small that would still be here when nobody remembered my name. Second steps grew. Rose stayed. She had a baby who slept on the counter in a woven basket while we rang up boots and told stories of how women find each other. I taught her to put money in her shoe. She taught me to put my phone on Do Not Disturb when I wanted to read. We planted a row of marigolds along the curb to keep rabbits and sorrow away. Women brought us their shoes with the toes worn down from all the times they dug in. Daniel came home this summer. He turned 45 with a face like Regret's cousin. His marriage had ended. His job had moved to a coast his heart didn't recognize. And he wanted to know if there was a place for him in the town that had made him small. I handed him a hammer. Build me shelves, I said. We called the carpenter, who was not Levi anymore because time doesn't know you owe it anything. But his son came, a lanky man with soft hands that knew what to do with wood because childhood had taught him to learn with his eyes. The two of them built shelves that held more than shoes. They held a kind of hope I hadn't expected to see again. My tragedies were not bigger than anyone else's, though they felt that way when they arrived. My sacrifices were not pure, though I tried to trim them into shape. My revenge came in walking forward when staying put would have left me safe and smaller. The lessons were ordinary, like flour, and strong like coffee left on the burner a minute too long. This is a story about courage that looks like a woman counting 20s. In a back room and unlocking the door 10 minutes early because a man is outside with a sock full of holes. It's about standing up in rooms where your knees shake and your hands sweat and you keep talking anyway. There is one more thing. It was late fall when the letter came. The seal was different, but the color was the same. I recognized the font. It said I had been selected for an honorary degree from a college I had once nearly attended. They wanted to honor my community work, they said, and my advocacy for fair housing and my shop with the marigolds. They wanted me to speak at commencement. I laughed so hard I cried. The ribbon in my hair, blueberries, and stubbornness trembled like a sigh. On the day of the ceremony, I put on a dress the color of a robin's egg and my brown Oxfords. The soul was held together with stories and a cobbler's skill I'd learned late. You came with me, baby. You in a black dress with boots and a notebook. The dean used words like uplift and resilience, and I thought about dishwater and train tracks and the smell of rain when it's about to try something foolish. When it was my turn, I walked up to the microphone and felt every mile ID ever walked lining up behind me to push me forward. I am not educated the way you are, I said to that sea of caps. I have learned from bills and babies and women who keep spare keys in their brass. But I know something you will need. The world will tell you to move, to adapt, to chase. Sometimes that's right, but sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand. I told them about Pike and the ledger, about Liddy and the shoe, about the marigolds, and the developer and the binder with tabs. I told them the secret of revenge and the truth about kindness. I told them to put money in their shoe if they had to, and always. Always to sit with someone in a waiting room and keep their pin between their lips until their words could come out kind. Afterward, we went to a diner not Binks, 'cause that had burned down and risen under a new name with the same smell of grease and longing. We slid into a booth and you said, Grandma, I want to tell stories. I want to tell yours. That's when I knew I'd won in a way no enemy could undo. Not in courtrooms, not in storefronts, but in your heart, the place where we keep the maps. The end of this story isn't a bang. It's a door opening and a pair of shoes being lifted out of a box. It's me sitting on the edge of my bed while the afternoon sun makes everything look kinder. It's me unlacing the brown Oxfords with hands that have threaded 1,000 needles and tied 1,000 laces. It's me setting those shoes in your lap. They're too big and too small at the same time. They smell like leaf mold and soap. Smell like Mama's breath when she told me I'd chosen the right thing. They smell like rivers and rooms where women made plans. They smell like every step I refuse to let anyone take away from me. Try them, I say. You slip your feet in and your toes find the places my toes made safe. The heel thumps down with a sound the room recognizes. I watch you stand the way a person stands the first time they feel the full, honest weight of their life. A little unsure, little thrilled. I see your knees bend and straighten. See your shoulders square. See my mother's pincushion in your hands and my ledger in your pocket and a ribbon in your hair that you dyed with blueberries or bravery or both. You say, Grandma, they're sturdy. I say, and yours. Now, you take one step and then another and another. The boards creak like they're telling secrets they want you to hear. You walk to the doorway and turn to look at me the way Levi once did with that sideways gentleness. You look at me the way Daniel did when he was born, and didn't he know yet how hard it would get? You look at me the way I looked at Mama when I chose shoes over sugar bowls, and didn't he know that was courage? Tell me how to begin, you ask. Begin by standing. I say, then walk. When someone tries to make you small, remember that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It can be you living well and long and kind. It can be you opening the door 10 minutes early. It can be you keeping money in your shoe until you don't have to anymore. And when you see a woman in a waiting room with a bruise flowering, or a man on a bench with a cane tapping the rhythm of his regrets, sit with them. That's how we win. That's how we don't drown. You nod. You take another step. The shoes squeak the way leather squeaks when it is pleased to be used. Outside, the sky is that clean kind of blue that makes you think of laundry and hymns. You reach the porch and the world is there, full of people being people. Good most of 'em flawed and trying and hungry and worthy of a little pie if you have it. The marigolds along the curb are almost vulgar in their joy. The train line hums like a long, low vow. I close my eyes and I see them all daddy under his neighbor's truck. Mama with the pincushion, Levi with his nails, Drew with his cane, Liddy with her sugar and her advice, Pike with his ledger, Ro with her black-winged hair, Daniel with his shelves, you with your boots and your notebook and your hunger. I see myself standing in all the rooms where I was scared and did it anyway. I see the shoes, the old brown ones, marching through ruined kitchens, up courthouse steps, cross stages, down aisles, over thresholds, into rooms where some small, ordinary miracle was about to happen. When I open my eyes, you are halfway down the walk. You turn to wave and it hits me, hard and clean as river water. I survived for this. Not for the degree or the district we saved or the ledgers or the lollipops. For this handing over, for this walking away in shoes that remember me, Grandma, you call. Yes, I'll bring them back sometimes. Don't. I say wear them out. Let them die on your feet. Then get yourself new ones. Hand-me-downs are only holy if they make room for your own path. You grin that grin of ours, the one we got from someone who got it from someone who filled it with sugar and stubbornness and truth. You head out into a world that will try to take and try to change and try to tell you who you are. Your steps are a small percussion, brave and steady. Mine are softer now, but they keep time. When the porch is empty and the house is full of the hush that follows good company, I slide the shoebox back under the bed. It's lighter than it's ever been. That is a kind of ache. That is also a kind of answer. I lie back and listen to the train. I think of all the places I didn't go and all the places my feet took me anyway. I think of revenge and how it doesn't taste like blood but like breath after you've been under too long. I think of the girls who will sit in waiting rooms and the women who will stand when would be easier to run, and the boys who will learn to build shelves and lives that hold more than they thought possible. I close my eyes. The daylight makes a clean square on the floor like a page with nothing on it yet. Somewhere out there, you are walking. Somewhere not far behind, the sound of your steps is joined by others. A counterpoint of courage, wearing out the leather of this world one necessary mile at a time.